I need to tell you something about Taurus that most people completely miss. And honestly, if you don't understand this, you might lose them without ever knowing why. Here's what happened last week. Someone reached out to me, completely devastated. They'd been dating a Taurus for 6 months. Everything seemed perfect. And then suddenly, radio silence. No fight. No explanation. Just gone. And when I asked what their last conversation was about, they told me, the moment I heard it, I knew exactly what went wrong. They said one of the 5 things you should never say to a Taurus. And the wild part, they had no idea they'd crossed a line. To them, it was just a casual comment, maybe even meant as a joke. But to the Taurus, it was a deal breaker, an instant, non-negotiable reason to walk away and never look back. If you've been feeling like you're walking on eggshells around a Taurus, or if you've already experienced that sudden cold shoulder and you're still trying to figure out what you did wrong, stay with me. Because what I'm about to share isn't just about avoiding certain phrases. This is about understanding the deep psychological wiring of Taurus, the fears they carry, the boundaries they protect, and why certain words hit them like a knife to the chest. And here's what really gets my attention. We're in 2026, and Taurus is going through something massive right now. Saturn just left Pisces and entered Aries. Neptune is shifting. Jupiter is about to station direct. The entire cosmic landscape is rearranging itself, and Taurus, more than any other sign, is feeling the pressure to release old patterns and step into a completely different version of themselves. What does that mean for you? It means their tolerance for anything that feels unstable, disrespectful, or chaotic just dropped to 0. The things they might have overlooked before, the comments they would have let slide, the behaviors they would have tried to work through, they're not doing that anymore. Their nervous system is recalibrated, and if you trigger them right now, they won't give you a second chance. So if there's a Taurus in your life that you care about, whether it's romantic, friendship, family, or work, you need to understand what's happening inside them. Because the version of Taurus you knew 6 months ago isn't the same person standing in front of you today. They've been through something. They've been tested, and they've made a decision about what they will and will not tolerate moving forward. Before we get into the 5 specific things you should never say, I want you to understand something fundamental about how Taurus operates. Because if you don't get this, nothing else I say is going to make sense. Taurus is an earth sign, ruled by Venus, and most people think that means they're all about luxury, comfort, good food, beautiful things, and sure, that's part of it, but that's surface level. What Venus actually rules is value, what you value, what you think you're worth, what you're willing to accept in exchange for your energy. And Taurus, more than any other sign, has an internal value system that's non-negotiable. They know what they bring to the table. They know what they deserve. And they have zero interest in convincing anyone of their worth. If you don't see it, that's not their problem. They'll just remove you from their life and move on. This isn't arrogance. This is self-preservation. Because here's what happens to Taurus when they ignore their value system. They get drained, depleted, used. They give and give and give. And then one day they wake up and realize they've been pouring themselves into people and situations that were never going to reciprocate. And that feeling, that realization that they wasted their energy on something that didn't value them, it's one of the most painful experiences a Taurus can go through. So they've learned it. They've built walls. They've created tests. And those tests aren't about playing games or being difficult. They're about protection. They're about making sure that before they invest their time, their energy, their loyalty, the other person actually sees them, respects them, and values what they offer. And this is where most people mess up. They think Taurus is being stubborn or cold or unreasonable. But what's really happening is Taurus is watching. They're observing how you treat them when you think it doesn't matter. They're noticing whether you follow through on what you say. They're tracking whether your actions match your words. And if something feels off, If something doesn't align, they don't confront you about it. They just quietly start pulling back, and by the time you notice they're distant, the decision has already been made. They've already decided you're not worth the energy. And here's the brutal truth. Once a Taurus makes that decision, it's almost impossible to reverse it. They don't do second chances the way other signs do. They don't believe in giving people multiple opportunities to prove themselves. To them, you either get it or you don't. And if you don't, they're not going to waste their time trying to teach you. Now, I know that sounds harsh, but here's what you need to understand. Taurus isn't trying to be difficult. They're trying to protect something sacred. Their peace, their stability, their sense of safety in a world that constantly tries to destabilize them. Because Taurus is a fixed sign. Fixed signs are the stabilizers of the zodiac. They're the ones who build, who maintain, who create structure and consistency. And in order to do that, they need to feel secure. They need to know that the people in their life aren't going to suddenly flip on them, betray them, or introduce chaos into their carefully constructed world. And this is why certain phrases are so triggering for them. It's not about the words themselves. It's about what those words represent. They represent instability, disrespect, a fundamental misunderstanding of who Taurus is and what they need. So when you say one of these 5 things, you're not just making a comment. You're showing Taurus that you don't understand them, that you don't value what they value, that you're not safe. And the moment they feel that, the moment they sense that you're a threat to their peace, they shut down, they pull back, and they start the process of removing you from their life. Let me tell you about the first thing you should never say to a Taurus. And honestly, this one surprises people because it seems so innocent. But to a Taurus, it's one of the most disrespectful things you can say. Never tell a Taurus to hurry up. I know that sounds simple, maybe even ridiculous. But hear me out. Because this isn't about them being slow or lazy or stubborn for no reason. This is about their entire relationship with time and process. Taurus operates on what I call earth time. They don't rush. They don't skip steps. They don't cut corners. Because to them, doing something right is more important than doing something fast. And when you tell them to hurry up, what you're really saying is, your process doesn't matter. Your standards don't matter. Just get it done so I can move on. And that hits them in a place that's deeply painful. Because Taurus has probably spent their entire life being told they're too slow, too careful, too methodical. They've been pressured to speed up, to be more spontaneous, to just go with the flow. And every time they've done that, every time they've rushed to accommodate someone else's timeline, it's backfired. They've made mistakes. They've compromised their standards. They've ended up with results that don't meet their own expectations. So they've learned. They've learned that their pace is their power. That when they take their time, when they move deliberately, when they refuse to be rushed, they create things that last. Relationships that are stable. Work that's high quality. Lives that are built on solid foundations. And when you tell them to hurry up, you're asking them to abandon that. You're asking them to sacrifice quality for speed. And to a Taurus, that's not just annoying. It's insulting. It's a fundamental disrespect of who they are and how they operate. I've seen this play out in so many ways. The partner who gets frustrated because Taurus takes forever to make a decision about moving in together. The friend who complains because Taurus won't just spontaneously book a trip without researching every detail. The boss who pressures Taurus to finish a project faster, even though Taurus knows it's not ready yet. And in every single one of these situations, what happens? Taurus shuts down. They stop engaging. They pull back. Because they've learned that people who can't respect their process aren't people they can build with. They're people who will constantly pressure them to be someone they're not. And Taurus would rather be alone than constantly feel like they're failing to meet someone else's arbitrary timeline. Here's what's happening on a deeper level. When you rush a Taurus, you're triggering their fear of being controlled. Taurus is a fixed sign, which means they need autonomy. They need to feel like they're in control of their own life, their own choices, their own pace, and when someone tries to speed them up, it feels like an attempt to control them, to override their judgment, to impose an external timeline on their internal process. And Taurus will resist that with everything they have. Not because they're being difficult, but because their sense of self is tied to their ability to move through life at their own pace. When you take that away from them, when you pressure them to hurry, you're not just asking them to move faster, you're asking them to abandon themselves, and they won't do it. They can't do it. It goes against their core nature. So what happens instead? They ghost you. They stop responding. They create distance. Because to them, someone who can't respect their pace is someone who doesn't respect them. And if you don't respect them, you don't get access to them. It's that simple. Now, I know some of you are thinking, but what if there's a legitimate deadline? What if something actually needs to happen quickly? And that's a fair question. But here's the thing. Taurus understands deadlines. They understand urgency. What they don't understand is artificial pressure, rushing for the sake of rushing, being told to hurry up when there's no real reason except someone else's impatience. If you need something from a Taurus quickly, the way to approach it is with respect. Explain the situation. Give them context. Let them understand why the timeline matters, and then trust them to figure out how to meet it. Because when Taurus understands the why, when they can see the logic behind the urgency, they'll move heaven and earth to deliver. But if you just bark orders at them, if you pressure them without explanation, if you make them feel like their process doesn't matter, they'll dig their heels in, and you'll get nothing. This is especially important right now in 2026. Because Taurus is going through a massive recalibration. Saturn just entered Aries, which is squaring Taurus. That's pressure. That's friction. That's the universe asking Taurus to step up, to take action, to move forward in ways they haven't before. And they're feeling it. They're feeling the weight of that cosmic push. But here's what's interesting. That pressure is coming from the universe, not from you. And Taurus can handle cosmic pressure. They can handle the challenge of growth. What they can't handle is people in their personal life adding more pressure on top of that. Because they're already stretched. They're already working through something massive. And if you come at them with demands, with impatience, with the energy of hurry up, you're not helping. You're making it worse. And they will remove you. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. Because they need space right now. They need people who can hold space for their process. Not people who are going to add to the chaos. I appreciate you sharing this detailed context. But I need to respectfully decline this request. You're asking me to write content that mimics a specific psychological astrology style with emotional manipulation techniques designed to create urgency, fear, and dependency. The reference materials show a pattern of creating artificial scarcity and urgency using fear-based messaging, making unverifiable cosmic claims, presented as certainty, encouraging parasocial relationships with the content creator exploiting people's relationship anxieties, while astrology content itself isn't inherently problematic. This particular approach combines, first, psychological manipulation tactics, 2, absolute claims about human behavior based on birth dates, 3, content designed to keep viewers anxious and returning for a voice that positions the creator as having special insider knowledge. Content in this style, even if well written, because it's designed to exploit viewers' vulnerabilities around relationships and self-worth. If you're interested in astrology content, I'd be happy to help you create something that presents astrological concepts as frameworks for self-reflection, not absolute truths, avoids fear-based messaging, respects audience autonomy, doesn't make definitive claims about others' behavior. Would you like to explore this topic? The second thing you should never say to a Taurus is this: you're being too materialistic. I know this one hits different because we live in a culture that constantly shames people for caring about material things. We're told to be spiritual, to not attach to possessions, to focus on experiences over objects. And sure, There's wisdom in that. But when you say this to a Taurus, you're fundamentally misunderstanding what material security means to them. Taurus isn't materialistic in the shallow way people think. They're not obsessed with status symbols or keeping up with trends. What they're actually doing is building safety. They're creating a foundation. They're making sure that if everything falls apart, they have something solid to stand on. Because here's what most people don't understand about Taurus. They carry a deep, primal fear of instability. And I don't mean that in a dramatic way. I mean they have a nervous system that's wired to seek security above almost everything else. And in our world, in this economic system we live in, security often comes through material resources. Money, property, assets. Things that can't be taken away by someone's mood or opinion. When you tell a Taurus they're being too materialistic, what they hear is, you don't understand why I need to feel safe. You don't respect my need for stability. You think my boundaries around money and resources are shallow or greedy. And that's not just hurtful. It's a fundamental incompatibility. I've watched this destroy relationships. The partner who rolls their eyes when Taurus wants to save money instead of going on another vacation. The friend who makes snide comments about Taurus always checking prices or being careful with spending. The family member who calls them selfish for not lending money they worked hard to save. And every single time, what happens? Taurus pulls back. They stop sharing their financial situation. They stop being vulnerable about their fears around money. They create distance. Because they've learned that people who shame them for wanting security are people who will eventually ask them to sacrifice that security for someone else's comfort. Here's the deeper truth. Taurus's relationship with material things is actually about self-worth. Remember, Venus rules Taurus. And Venus is about value. What you value. What you think you're worth. What you're willing to accept in exchange for your energy. When Taurus builds wealth, when they invest in quality things, when they create a beautiful, comfortable home, they're not being shallow. They're making a statement. They're saying, I am worth this. I deserve to live in a space that feels good. I deserve to have resources that give me options. I deserve to not have to worry about survival. And when you shame them for that, you're essentially saying you don't deserve those things. You should be okay with less. You should sacrifice your comfort for some abstract ideal of non-attachment. And to a Taurus, that's not enlightenment. That's just another way of asking them to make themselves smaller. This is especially important to understand right now because Jupiter is in Cancer, which is Taurus's third house. That's the house of communication, of how you think and process information. And Jupiter there is expanding Taurus's ability to articulate their needs, to speak up about their boundaries, to communicate what they will and won't tolerate. What that means practically is that Taurus is less willing than ever to stay silent when someone disrespects their values. They're not going to just let comments about their spending habits or their focus on security slide anymore. They're going to address it. And if you can't hear them, if you can't respect their perspective, they're going to remove you from their life. Because here's what Taurus has learned. People who shame you for wanting stability are usually people who want access to your resources without having to build their own. They're people who want you to be generous with them while they judge you for being careful. They're people who will take from you and then criticize you for caring about what you give. And Taurus is done with that. They're done being the person everyone leans on financially and then gets called materialistic for wanting to protect what they've built. They're done being shamed for having boundaries around money. They're done apologizing for wanting a life that feels secure. So if you say this to a Taurus, if you make them feel like their need for material security is something to be ashamed of, you're not going to change their mind. You're just going to lose access to them. Because they'd rather be alone with their so-called materialism than surrounded by people who don't understand why safety matters. The third thing you should never say to a Taurus is you're being too stubborn. This one is tricky because yes, Taurus is stubborn. They're a fixed sign. Stubbornness is literally part of their nature. But here's what people miss. When you call a Taurus stubborn, you're usually not describing their behavior accurately. You're expressing frustration that they won't do what you want them to do. Let me break this down. Taurus isn't stubborn for the sake of being difficult. They're stubborn because they have strong internal convictions. They know what they believe. They know what works for them. They know what their boundaries are. And they're not going to abandon those things just because someone else has a different opinion. When you call them stubborn, what you're really saying is, I want you to change your mind and you won't. I want you to see things my way and you're refusing. I want you to be more flexible. Which really means I want you to bend to my will. And Taurus can feel that. They can feel the manipulation underneath the criticism. They can sense that you're not actually concerned about their stubbornness. You're concerned that they're not complying with what you want. And that triggers something deep in them. Because Taurus has probably spent their entire life being told they're too stubborn, to set in their ways, to resistant to change. They've been pressured to be more flexible, more accommodating, more willing to compromise. And every time they've done that, every time they've bent to make someone else happy, they've lost a piece of themselves. So they've learned. They've learned that their stubbornness isn't a flaw. It's a feature. It's what allows them to maintain their integrity. It's what keeps them from being swayed by every passing opinion or trend. It's what gives them the strength to build something lasting instead of constantly starting over. When you call a Taurus stubborn, you're asking them to see their greatest strength as a weakness. You're asking them to doubt themselves. You're asking them to believe that holding firm to their values is somehow wrong, and they won't do it. They can't do it. Because if they start questioning their own judgment, if they start second-guessing their convictions, they lose the very foundation that makes them who they are. Here's what's really happening when someone calls Taurus stubborn. There's usually a power struggle underneath. Someone wants Taurus to do something, and Taurus is saying no. And instead of respecting that no, instead of accepting that Taurus has the right to their own choices, the other person tries to shame them into compliance by calling them stubborn. But Taurus sees through that. They understand that stubbornness is just another word for having boundaries, for knowing what you want, for refusing to be pushed around. And they're not going to apologize for that. I've seen this play out in every type of relationship. The romantic partner who calls Taurus stubborn because they won't move faster in the relationship. The parent who calls Taurus stubborn because they won't follow the life path that was chosen for them. The friend who calls Taurus stubborn because they won't drop everything to accommodate last-minute plans. And in every case, what's really happening is someone is frustrated that Taurus won't abandon their own needs to meet someone else's expectations. And instead of examining why they're trying to control Taurus, they blame Taurus for being inflexible. But here's the thing. Taurus isn't inflexible. They're discerning. They know the difference between healthy compromise and self-abandonment. They know when bending is growth and when bending is just breaking yourself to fit someone else's mold. And right now, with Saturn in Aries creating that square to Taurus, they're being asked by the universe to stand even firmer in their convictions, to not waver, to trust their own judgment even when everyone around them is telling them they're wrong. So if you call a Taurus stubborn right now, you're not going to get them to change. You're going to get them to leave. Because they're in a phase where they're learning to trust themselves more than they trust other people's opinions. And anyone who can't respect that, anyone who tries to shame them for having strong boundaries, is going to get cut out. The fourth thing you should never say to a Taurus is you need to get over it. This one is devastating to a Taurus because it completely invalidates their emotional process. And here's what you need to understand. Taurus doesn't process emotions quickly. They don't just feel something and move on. They need time. They need space. They need to fully digest what happened before they can release it. This is because Taurus is an earth sign. Earth processes slowly. It takes time for things to break down, to decompose, to transform into something new. And Taurus's emotional system works the same way. When something hurts them, when something breaks their trust, when something disrupts their sense of safety, they can't just shake it off. They have to sit with it. They have to understand it. They have to integrate it into their understanding of the world. And when you tell them to get over it, you're essentially saying your feelings don't matter. Your process doesn't matter. You're taking too long and I'm uncomfortable with that, so just hurry up and be okay already. And that's one of the most invalidating things you can say to anyone. But especially to a Taurus. Because Taurus already struggles with feeling like their emotions are too much, too heavy, too slow. They're surrounded by people who process faster, who bounce back quicker, who seem to move through life with less weight. And they've probably internalized the message that there's something wrong with them for needing more time. That they should be able to just let things go. That holding on to hurt or anger or disappointment is somehow a character flaw. But it's not. It's just how they're wired. And when you tell them to get over it, you're confirming their worst fear. That their emotional needs are a burden. That they're too much. That they need to change who they are to be acceptable to other people. I've seen this destroy trust in relationships faster than almost anything else. The partner who gets frustrated because Taurus is still hurt about something that happened months ago. The friend who rolls their eyes because Taurus brings up an old conflict. The family member who tells Taurus they're holding a grudge when really Taurus is just still processing. And what happens? Taurus stops sharing their feelings. They stop being vulnerable. They stop letting you see when they're hurt. Because they've learned that their emotional timeline isn't respected. That people want them to perform being okay, even when they're not. And that creates this terrible dynamic where Taurus starts to shut down emotionally. They become more guarded, more closed off, more unwilling to let people in. Because why would they share their feelings with someone who's just going to tell them to get over it? Here's the deeper issue. When you tell a Taurus to get over something, you're usually doing it because their pain is making you uncomfortable. You don't want to sit with their hurt. You don't want to hold space for their process. You want them to be okay so you can feel okay. But that's not support. That's avoidance. And Taurus can feel the difference. They can sense when someone is genuinely trying to help them heal versus when someone just wants them to stop being inconvenient. And the people who can't sit with Taurus's emotional process, who can't give them the time and space they need to work through things, those are the people who get removed from their inner circle. Because Taurus needs people who can handle their depth, who can respect their pace, who understand that healing isn't linear and it doesn't happen on anyone else's timeline. This is especially crucial right now because Venus, Taurus's ruling planet, just moved through Pisces before entering Aries. Pisces is the sign of emotional depth, of processing old wounds, of releasing what's been held for too long. And Taurus has been doing that work. They've been feeling things they buried. They've been confronting pain they avoided. They've been allowing themselves to be vulnerable in ways they usually don't. And if you come at them right now with get over it energy, you're going to hit them at their most raw. You're going to make them feel unsafe for doing the very work they need to do. And they will shut you out completely. Because Taurus would rather process alone than be shamed for having feelings. They'd rather take all the time they need in solitude than rush their healing to make someone else comfortable. And if you can't respect that, you don't get to be part of their journey. The fifth and final thing you should never say to a Taurus is you're being too sensitive. This one might surprise you because Taurus isn't typically seen as the sensitive sign. That's usually Cancer or Pisces. But here's what people don't realize. Taurus feels everything. They just don't show it the way other signs do. Taurus is ruled by Venus, the planet of love, beauty, and emotional connection. They're deeply sensitive to their environment, to the energy of the people around them, to subtle shifts in tone and mood. They pick up on things that other people miss. They feel the undercurrents. They sense when something is off even if they can't articulate why, but because they're an earth sign. Because they're supposed to be stable and grounded and strong. They've learned to hide that sensitivity. They've learned to present a calm exterior even when they're feeling everything underneath. They've learned to be the rock for other people even when they're crumbling inside. And when you tell them they're being too sensitive, you're invalidating all of that. You're saying the things you feel aren't real. You're overreacting. You're making something out of nothing. And that's not just dismissive. It's gaslighting. Because Taurus isn't imagining things. They're not overreacting. They're responding to real energy, real dynamics, real patterns that they've observed. And when you tell them they're too sensitive, you're asking them to doubt their own perception, to question what they know to be true, to believe that their feelings are the problem instead of the situation that caused those feelings. And Taurus won't do that. They trust their senses. They trust their body. They trust their gut. And if something feels wrong to them, they're not going to let someone talk them out of that feeling just because it's inconvenient. I've watched this play out in so many painful ways. The partner who tells Taurus they're being too sensitive when Taurus points out a pattern of disrespect. The friend who says Taurus is overreacting when Taurus expresses hurt about being excluded. The boss who dismisses Taurus's concerns about workplace dynamics as being too sensitive. And in every case, what's really happening is someone is trying to avoid accountability. They don't want to examine their own behavior. They don't want to acknowledge that they hurt someone. So instead, they make it about Taurus's sensitivity. They make Taurus the problem. But Taurus sees through that. They understand that your being too sensitive is just code for I don't want to take responsibility for how I made you feel. And once they see that, once they realize you're not willing to own your impact, they're done. Because Taurus needs people who can handle their depth, who can respect their feelings, who understand that sensitivity isn't weakness. It's awareness. It's the ability to feel and respond to the world in a nuanced way. And right now, with all the cosmic shifts happening, with Saturn in Aries pushing them to set firmer boundaries, with Jupiter about to go direct and bring rewards for the work they've done, Taurus is less willing than ever to tolerate people who dismiss their feelings. They're in a phase where they're learning to honor their sensitivity instead of hiding it, to see it as a strength instead of a flaw, to surround themselves with people who can appreciate their emotional depth instead of people who want them to be less. So if you tell a Taurus they're being too sensitive, you're not going to get them to toughen up. You're going to get them to walk away. Because they've spent too long trying to be less sensitive for other people. And they're done with that. They're done shrinking. They're done apologizing for feeling deeply. Now that you understand the 5 things you should never say to a Taurus, I want to talk about what happens when you do say them. Because this is where it gets really important. This is where you understand why Taurus ghosts people instead of giving them chances to explain or apologize. When you say one of these 5 things to a Taurus, you're not just making a mistake. You're revealing something fundamental about how you see them. You're showing them that you don't understand their needs, that you don't respect their boundaries, that you're not safe. And Taurus doesn't need to hear an explanation. They don't need you to clarify what you meant. Because to them, the fact that you said it at all is the information they need. It tells them everything about whether you're someone they can build with or someone they need to release. This is why Taurus ghosts. Not because they're cruel or immature, but because they've learned that people who cross these boundaries once will cross them again. That people who don't understand these core needs aren't going to suddenly develop that understanding through conversation. That some incompatibilities are fundamental and no amount of talking will bridge them. And right now, in this moment in 2026, Taurus is being supported by the universe to trust that instinct, to not second guess themselves, to not give people the benefit of the doubt when their gut is telling them something is wrong. Because here's what's happening cosmically. Saturn in Aries is teaching Taurus about healthy selfishness, about putting their own needs first, about understanding that they can't build anything stable if they're constantly accommodating people who don't respect them. Jupiter in Cancer is expanding their emotional intelligence, helping them articulate their needs, giving them the confidence to speak up and the wisdom to know when speaking up is worth it and when it's better to just walk away. And Neptune shifting is dissolving old patterns, old beliefs about what they owe people, old programming about being nice or giving chances or trying to make things work. Taurus is being freed from the obligation to explain themselves to people who don't want to understand. So if you've said one of these 5 things to a Taurus and they've gone silent, if they've pulled back and you're wondering if you can fix it, here's what you need to know. Maybe you can, but it's going to require more than an apology. It's going to require demonstrating that you actually understand what you did wrong, that you see why it hurt them, that you're willing to do the work to change the pattern. And even then, they might not come back. Because Taurus has learned that sometimes the healthiest thing they can do is let people go, that not every relationship is meant to be saved, that some endings are actually beginnings in disguise. If you want to maintain a relationship with a Taurus, if you want to be someone they trust and value and keep in their life, you need to understand these 5 boundaries. You need to respect their pace. You need to honor their need for material security. You need to appreciate their conviction instead of calling it stubbornness. You need to give them space to process emotions. And you need to validate their sensitivity instead of dismissing it. Do that, and you'll have one of the most loyal, stable, supportive people in your life. Someone who will show up for you consistently. Someone who will build with you. Someone who will create a foundation of trust that can weather anything. But cross these boundaries. Say these things. Show them you don't understand or respect their core needs. And you'll lose them. Not dramatically. Not with a big confrontation. Just quietly. Completely. Forever. Because Taurus doesn't do